there is a number that I want you to sit with, and that number is 50%. 50% of American adults read at or below a sixth grade reading level, and that is absolutely shocking. There exists on the North American continent, because Canada is slightly better. It's not much better, but it's slightly better. There exists a massive literacy crisis that no one is addressing. And this literacy crisis has profound second, third, and fourth order consequences. We are not talking about people, ladies and gentlemen, who are broke. We are not talking about people who grew up without schools. We're talking about people who went through our modern publicly funded education system and came out the other end unable to read. In the United States specifically, this is where Canada is slightly better, but in the United States specifically, if you go to some low income counties, their public schools are like third world. That is just a fact. Now, if you live in some high income counties, because your county decides your public school, you have access to quality public schooling. But this is a very shocking statistic that has very profound consequences. Now, functional illiteracy actually has a massive societal cost. When you have people that literally can't read or write at even like a 10th or 12th grade level, you have people that can't contribute towards any meaningful intellectual work. People who can't read medical documents, people who can't read academic studies. Now, yes, you have to be at a university level education to read academic studies, but it is still very significant that you have an entire population, like an entire subset of the population, even a majority of the population, that can't access some of the most profound works of the civilization. The greatest cultural cost, in my view, is that the world's greatest literature is functionally inaccessible to half the population. You look at Orwell's 1984, in which he warns about a totalitarian state. Half the population can't even read that because it's written, I believe, at a 10th or 12th grade reading level, and their reading level is below that. Half the population can't read that, and they can't understand the profound consequences of what it means to live in a totalitarian state. Orwell, his 1984, his Animal Farm, these are great texts when you want to understand how totalitarian states can oppress people. But then there's existential literature. There's some of my favorite literature: Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, Fyodor Dostoevsky. People can't read, Crime and Punishment, the Brothers Karamazov. You need at least a 12th grade reading level to read that. People can't read War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And these are novels, in my view, that are so much more rewarding to finish than, watching another rerun of Prison Break, watching the new offshoot of Suits. People are binged in front of Netflix all day, but they literally can't engage with some of the greatest works in literature that civilization has ever produced. These aren't academic texts either. These are the foundational texts of Western civilization. Look at the Iliad and the Odyssey. There's a movie coming out about the Odyssey in a month or two, and I guarantee you millions of people are going to watch the movie. But how many people have read the Odyssey? Reading the Odyssey is going to fix your attention span in a way that, abstaining from TikTok alone could never do. How many people have read and extrapolated the profound lessons from the Odyssey, the longing from home? You look at Penelope and how she resisted temptation while her husband was gone. You look at the profound lessons of not boasting when Odysseus boasts and Poseidon curses him, and he has to, he's delayed from reaching home by another 10 years. It is insane how many people can't read the foundational texts of our civilization. Another thing that I want to talk about is schools are functionally a joke. What are children actually learning in the modern day? Because it's worth examining honestly. A child in the West spends roughly 13 years in public education, from kindergarten through 12th grade. And its explicit purpose is education. And it's failing. And the reason it's failing is a lack of academic rigor, poor quality teachers, and funding. And funding is actually usually diagnosed as the main cause. It's actually not the main cause. It's like third, fourth, maybe fifth on the list. The main cause is a lack of academic rigor, a lack of discipline, and a lack of quality teachers. And because of the quality teachers are teachers who enforce discipline and academic rigor. I mentioned reading, but reading is the master skill. It's the key that unlocks every other domain of knowledge: history, science, philosophy. If you can't read at an advanced level, you can't access any of these other domains. When schools fail to teach reading, they're not just failing to teach one subject, they're failing to equip people with the conduit to all these other subjects. The last thing I want to talk about is, I mentioned that discipline and academic rigor are the two most important things. I fundamentally believe that to be true. What most people don't understand is intelligence is actually irrelevant. Now, it's not completely irrelevant, but largely irrelevant. I'll explain what I mean. Intelligence is not as important as discipline. Let's say you and I are both learning Japanese, and it takes me 4 iterations and it takes you 2 iterations to learn a concept. Let's say whether we're learning sounds, vowels, pronunciation, it takes you 2 tries and it takes me 4 tries to learn the same thing. So you're twice as faster than me, right? You're twice as fast as I am. Now, if I go to a private school and the private school enforces academic discipline and they watch me go through, and there's a shorter, a pupil to teacher ratio, there's only maybe 8 kids for every 1 teacher, and they watch me as I do, they force me to do those 4 iterations, and I'm disciplined and I consistently do that over the course of years, I'm going to learn Japanese. Whereas if you, even though you're technically smarter than me, if you go to a public school and people don't, check up on you, or people don't enforce academic rigor or discipline, and even though you can learn things faster, the lack of rigor is going to make it so that you don't learn. And a lot of concepts are like that. There might be 2 students, right? One student, it takes him like 20 seconds to grasp a math concept. And this other student, it takes him 60 seconds. So this student is 3 times faster than this guy. But this guy goes to a school that has academic rigor and discipline, where they force him to sit down, read, and learn the concept. So he has to apply himself, right? Through the application, he is able to learn faster than this guy whose school doesn't enforce academic rigor. Application and discipline are more important than intelligence. Even if you are more intelligent than a student, if that student applies themselves more and more than you, then they're eventually going to end up with better results. And that's the same thing with reading. It's not necessarily that people don't have the ability. They probably do have the ability. They have the functional IQ to read. It's just that the lack of discipline, the lack of rigor, the lack of oversight causes this, literacy crisis. And finally, lastly, before I log off, I want to say, how do we have money for wars, but we don't have money to educate our people? It's an honest question. The US is like, Canada has added 100, 200, 300 billion dollars to its debt in the last few years. The US is a different story altogether, tens of trillions of dollars of debt, and it's still unable to educate its population. A lot of parents still are forced to send their kids to private school because they want their kids to get a functional education. An illiterate population and a functionally illiterate population has profound consequences for society. These are people whose only prospects in life are labor. Like, they can't do anything besides labor. They can't engage in any sort of college educated intellectual work. They can never go to university if they read at a 5th grade level. The money is there. It always has been. The question is, who does it serve? The knowledge is there too. The knowledge that application, discipline, academic rigor, and intelligence is more important than intelligence. That knowledge is there too. But we've instead resigned to this new age think of, oh, you have to be soft, you have to give everybody a participation trophy, you have to make sure that a kid's feelings aren't hurt. Who cares if his feelings are hurt? Genuinely. If a kid can't read, who cares if his feelings are hurt? You have to sit there with extra support, and he has to apply himself, and he has to apply himself enough times that he can read accurately. And that kid will thank you in 20 years. In 20 years, when he can read at a 12th grade level, when he can process and synthesize information very fast and comprehend abstract ideas simply, he will thank his teachers, right? That kid could go on to become the president or the prime minister. Yet, we choose the momentary, the short-term, instant gratification of not offending the kid's feelings and maybe not making him cry, or maybe not making him go home to his mommy and complain that the school teacher was mean to him, instead of forcing him to actually learn and to apply himself. I think the lack of academic rigor is one of the main reasons. But ladies and gentlemen, the literacy crisis in the West is real. It is heartbreaking that, like, I love to read. And it's heartbreaking that some of my favorite literature is literally inaccessible to a huge swath of the population.